Hey guys, welcome to another video. This week I've decided to try my needle felting kit, and that's mostly because I've seen a lot of needle felting on YouTube lately. I did have this already, so I decided to take a crack at it, see how it works. This one is by Dimensions, and this specific kit will make a fox. So taking a look at what I've got here, looks like an instruction booklet. I believe this is a felting pad, some wool. We've got the needle, and a needle and some embroidery floss. So getting started with the orange wool, it looks like I'm going to make the tail of the fox first. And this wool is super soft. And I brought out my ruler here just because everything talks about ripping off pieces of wool in certain dimensions. For the tail specifically, it says a 2 by 5 inch piece of the orange wool. And that's definitely easier said than done because this wool really wants to stay together. Finally getting a clump of wool off of there. And it says to tightly roll it into a cylinder, which it doesn't really seem to want to stay together, but I'm hoping once I start using the needle that it'll want to stay together. And this is one of the hardest parts of it, is knowing when you're done with the needle, because you have to stab the wool quite a few times before it starts to stay together. And there's one big thing that this kit is definitely lacking, and it's the little finger guards that you're supposed to be wearing when you needle felt. And I found myself pricking myself with the needle without those. I don't know if it would have helped 100% to have those, but it just would have made me feel better if I knew I had the option of wearing them, just because of how sharp the needle was. So with the tail taking shape, I just want to refer to the back page of the instructions where it gives a guide of the size of each piece you should be aiming for. So my tail seems a little one-dimensional here. It should really taper to one end. So I am going to add a little bit more wool so I can try and fix that, and then obviously continue needling the felt so that it stays together. So a couple hundred stabs with the needle later, and the tail's looking pretty good. So I'm going to move on to the next part, and that's adding a wisp of white wool to the tip of the tail. So I'm just going to rip off a small piece of the white wool and wrap it around the end of the tail, and then I'll needle it in place. And it's worth noting that the colors that you add to the needle felted piece go on much easier. Once the initial shape of the tail was created, the white wisp went on much quicker. On to step 3, it's time to make the ears. So it calls for a 2-inch by 2-inch piece of the orange wool. And that just gets folded into a cone shape and then needled together. And this step actually accounts for both ears because you'll repeat this process with a second piece of wool. And my 2 ears ended up a little bit on the larger side. They didn't quite match up with the template, but they were at least the right shape. Steps 4 and 5 are really just adding details to the ears. So adding a small piece of black wool to the edges, and then a tuft of white wool in the center. And on to step 6, where you make the feet. And by this point, I'm pretty comfortable with the process of the needling. Definitely still time consuming. And on to step number 7. for the most part just using the rest of the wool to create the body. It mentions creating a definite neck crease, so that's just what I'm doing first here. And then needling the entire body until it's done. The instructions had mentioned reserving a quarter of the remaining yarn before making the body, so I'm just adding that now to fluff up the cheeks and the nose of the fox. And much like the way the white wisp worked on the end of the tail, these pieces go on fairly easily because the body has already been needled. So finally starting to look like a fox here, and I'm going to add on the ears next. And since my ears are a little bit bigger than they should be, this takes a little bit longer just because there's more wool that needs to be pinned down. This was definitely the fun part though, watching everything slowly come together. So after the ears, just going to move on to adding the white patches to the face and body of the fox. And this was a trickier step just because you want to get the two sides of the face symmetrical. Just have to add on the feet now. And then I'll move on to the tail. The last steps here are just making the details of the face, so adding the eyes and the nose, and a couple of stitches for toes and the mouth. I'm actually really happy with the way this is turning out. It does look pretty close to what they sold me on the package. I really wasn't sure how this was going to go since this is my first time trying needle felting, but I definitely wouldn't consider this a bad experience. I just don't know that I would do this again, at least in terms of making a three-dimensional piece. I've seen a few videos where people have done painting with wool, which definitely seems intriguing after this experience. Definitely something to look forward to in case I do a video on it somewhere in the future. Which, as a reminder, please subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more content. And with that, we're at the end of this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to hit the like button before you go. Check out some of my playlists if you have a chance, and I'll see you next week.